The radical right-wing settlers believe that the entirety of the city of Jerusalem should belong exclusively to the Jewish people. And building by building and block by block, they are working on pushing Palestinian families out of the homes that their families have been in for generations in an effort to establish permanent and exclusive Jewish control over the city. If there's ever to be peace, and there are two states, a state of Palestine and a state of Israel, then both of those states are going to have their capital in that one city. But since 1967, and particularly in recent years, right-wing Jewish settlers have made very, very aggressive efforts to assert full control over the entirety of the city by putting settlers into Arab neighborhoods, disrupting the status quo on the Temple Mount, where the Haram al-Sharif Mosque is, and evicting Palestinians who live in areas that they claim were Jewish prior to the War of Independence. And these points of friction in Jerusalem are among the most sensitive in the entire conflict, and they are what was leading to conflict last week. Part of the protests began to move onto the Temple Mount. The Israeli police went onto the Temple Mount. Scuffles and fighting broke out. Fires broke out. There was actual violence and tension on the Temple Mount itself.
And they began firing rockets on May 10th, hundreds of rockets into Israel towards Jerusalem. And I have had to run several times to the shelter with my 4-year-old daughter in the middle of the night. The families are hunkering down in one room together because they are saying that if their building will be hit, they would rather die altogether. That, for me as an Israeli, is something that is ever present in my mind. And especially every time I hear a plane fly over my head, I do think of the Palestinians in Gaza, the innocent civilians in Gaza that are subject to this violence on a daily basis. And it's heartbreaking.
J Street itself is an organization that believes very deeply that the Jewish people have a right to a state. We also believe very deeply that the Palestinian people have a right to a state. And the only way that this conflict is ever going to end is if both peoples are able to exercise their rights. American policy to date, over the course of several decades now, has been to provide unquestioned support for the state of Israel, essentially a blank check for Israel when it comes to financial assistance, immunity in the court of international opinion, and that stance of the United States weighing in 100% on the side of one party to the conflict is not the way for the United States to play a productive role. The biggest problem we've had in the first few months of the Biden administration is that the issue itself has been relegated, if not to a back burner, potentially even off the stove completely. The Biden administration needs to make crystal clear to the government of Israel that these evictions and displacements of Palestinian families in East Jerusalem cannot happen. This runs counter to American interest. It runs counter to Israeli interest. It is illegal under international law. And perhaps most importantly, it's simply immoral. And the United States has the power and it has the obligation to weigh in clearly with its ally Israel that these kinds of actions and behaviors are unacceptable to this country and to the international community.